My son said, "You're not part of our plans anymore." This words came out of my son's mouth like he was ordering coffee. We sat in his living room. On the leather couch I helped him buy 3 years ago when he and Nicole first moved in. Brandon cleared his throat, looked at Nicole, then at her mother Patricia, and finally at me. "Dad, you're not part of our plans anymore." I didn't move. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Nicole folded her hands in her lap, her face carefully blank. Patricia nodded once, like a teacher confirming a correct answer. That's when I understood. This wasn't spontaneous. They had practiced this, probably over breakfast, maybe the night before. They had rehearsed who would speak first, where everyone would sit, what words to use. My coffee sat untouched on the table between us. I had driven 40 minutes to get here, thinking we were having our usual Sunday visit. Instead, I was being dismissed. Brandon shifted in his seat, waiting for my reaction. Nicole adjusted her wedding ring, the one I helped pay for. Patricia's expression remained firm, supportive of her daughter's position. I realized I was supposed to say something now. Brandon started explaining slowly, like I might not understand big words. He said my opinions were outdated, that my comments made Nicole uncomfortable, that they needed freedom to make their own choices without my input. "It's not personal, Dad," he added, though it felt extremely personal. Patricia leaned forward. "This is really what's best for everyone, including you. You'll have more time for yourself. Less stress." I almost laughed at that. Less stress. As if being told you're no longer wanted by your only child reduces stress. Nicole finally spoke. "We've been thinking about this for a while. We need to establish boundaries." Boundaries. That word had become popular lately. I knew what it meant. It meant keeping me at a distance they found comfortable. "We hope you understand," Brandon continued. "We're not saying we won't see you, just less involved." I noticed no one asked how I felt about this. No one wondered if this hurt. They presented it like a business decision, already finalized. The room felt smaller, suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. I watched my son carefully. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He looked relieved, like he'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. This wasn't about boundaries. This was about authority. They weren't asking for space. They were asserting control. And Brandon was letting them. When had that happened? When had my son stopped being my son and started being their spokesperson? Patricia's hand rested on Nicole's shoulder, protective and possessive. The alignment was clear. Brandon had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. "Do you have any questions?" Nicole asked, her tone suggesting she hoped I didn't. I had 1,000 questions. When did I become a problem? What did I say that was so terrible? When did helping become interfering? But I didn't ask any of them, because I suddenly understood something more important. They didn't want discussion. They wanted compliance. Brandon's eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. That look told me everything. This decision was final, rehearsed, agreed upon. I was being managed out, like an employee who'd overstayed their welcome. While they waited for my response, my mind started calculating, not intentionally, just automatically, the way you can't help counting stairs as you climb them. I had paid for Brandon's college. For years at State University, $32,000. His first car, $8,000. The wedding. My contribution was $15,000 because Nicole's family couldn't afford half. This house. I co-signed a mortgage when the bank hesitated. Helped with the down payment. $12,000. The business loan when Brandon wanted to start his consulting firm. $25,000. He said he'd pay me back when things stabilized. That was 2 years ago. House repairs last winter when their furnace died. $3,000. Furniture. Appliances. Emergency vet bills for their dog. Countless dinners I picked up the check for. I wasn't keeping score before. But sitting there, being told I wasn't part of their plans, the numbers appeared in my head like receipts. I had been useful, very useful, but I had never been valued. There's a difference. I finally spoke. My voice came out calmer than I expected. "If I'm not part of your plans, what happens when I need help?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. Nicole looked at Patricia. Patricia answered first. That's just life, Thomas. We all get old. We all have to manage. Manage, I repeated. Yes, you're only 62. You're healthy. You have your retirement. You'll be fine. Brandon nodded, encouraged by his mother-in-law's certainty. Right, Dad. You've always been independent. Independent. Another word being redefined in real time. So, when you needed help with the furnace, that was different? I asked quietly. That was an emergency, Nicole said quickly, and we appreciated it. But this is about daily life, about emotional boundaries. I smiled slightly. I understand. Just clarifying the rules. They're not rules, Dad, Brandon said, sounding defensive now. It's just we need this. I nodded slowly. They needed this. Their needs, their plans, their future. All sentences that didn't include me. The clarity was actually helpful. I stood up, not dramatically. Just stood. I appreciate your honesty, I said. Really, it's better to know where things stand. Brandon looked surprised. So you're okay with this? I didn't say that. I said I appreciate the honesty. I picked up my jacket from the chair. Nicole and Patricia exchanged glances. They'd expected resistance. Tears maybe. Guilt trips. The old man causing a scene. Thank you for the coffee, I said. Even though I hadn't touched it, I walked to the door. Brandon followed, uncertain now. Dad, we can still... It's fine, Brandon. You were clear. I heard you. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away. I didn't look back at the house. My hands were steady on the wheel. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was crying or grieving. Because something had shifted in me. Something final and clear. They had given me permission to let go. And I was going to take it. The next morning, I went to my home office and opened the filing cabinet. Third drawer down. The folder marked Estate Planning sat where it had been for 8 years. I spread the papers on my desk and read through them slowly. Every page assumed love. Every clause presumed loyalty. The entire document was built on the idea that family meant something mutual. Primary beneficiary, Brandon Lawson, my son. Everything. The house. The retirement accounts. The life insurance. The small investment portfolio I'd built over 40 years of work. All of it flowing directly to him, with a smaller portion to my sister Helen in California. I remember the day I signed these papers. Brandon was 30, newly engaged, full of promise. I had been so proud. My attorney, Victor Hayes, had said something that day. Thomas, I hope you never need to change this, but life surprises us. Keep the documents where you can find them. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I understood. Victor had seen this before. I picked up the phone. Victor's office was downtown in one of those old buildings with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. He listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. You want to disinherit him? No, I said. I want to restructure everything. Make it conditional. Align what he receives with actual relationship. Victor leaned back in his chair. That's more complicated than cutting him out, but more fair. Tell me what you're thinking. We worked for 3 hours. I didn't remove Brandon from the will. I changed the structure, added clauses, created conditions. If he wanted the inheritance, he would need to demonstrate care, not just show up after I died for the reading. Actual documented involvement, regular contact, visits, participation in my life, not as obligations that earn money, but as proof that I mattered before I was gone. The investment accounts would go into a trust, managed by Victor, distributed over time based on Brandon's involvement. This creates accountability, Victor explained. He gets access but not control, and if the relationship stays distant, the distributions stop. What happens to it then? We'll designate secondary beneficiaries, charities, organizations. I nodded. Good. Thomas, this is legally sound, but it might create conflict. Victor, the conflict already exists. I'm just making it official. He signed as witness. I signed as principal. No one knew. Weeks passed. Then a month. My phone stayed quiet. No calls from Brandon. No check-ins. No, just want to see how you're doing, Dad. I saw their lives on social media. Though, Nicole posted constantly. Pictures of their renovated kitchen, new countertops, expensive tile, a trip to the mountains, dinner at restaurants I couldn't afford when I was their age. They looked happy, free, unburdened. Independence, I realized, hadn't reduced their dependence on the money I'd given them. It just made them feel less guilty about taking it. I kept my routine. Work at the community center 3 days a week. Gym on Tuesdays. Coffee with my friend Harold on Saturdays. Harold asked about Brandon once. I said we were giving each other space. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Harold's daughter lived in Oregon. They talked twice a year. The distance started feeling less like rejection and more like clarity. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I was adjusting to a new reality. And in that reality, I had decisions to make. 2 months after the living room conversation, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Thomas, it's Patricia. I paused. Nicole's mother had never called me before. Hello, Patricia. Her voice was warm. Too warm. Like honey covering something bitter. I was just thinking about you. How have you been? We haven't seen you in a while. I've been fine. Busy. That's wonderful. Staying active is so important at our age. She laughed lightly. I didn't laugh with her. Thomas, I wanted to ask you something. Just between us. Have you thought about the future? You're planning. There it was. The real reason for the call. I think about it, I said carefully. And is everything still the same as it was before? Why do you ask? Oh, just making conversation. You know how it is. We all want to make sure our affairs are in order. I redid mine last year. That's wise. So yours is still the same then? I let the silence sit for a moment. Patricia, if you have specific questions, you should ask Brandon to talk to me. Of course. I just thought, have a good day, Patricia. I hung up. My hand was shaking. Not from fear. From anger. They were watching me now. Brandon called that evening. Hey, Dad. How are you? The casual tone felt forced. Practice. I'm well. You? Good, good. Busy with work. Listen, Patricia mentioned she talked to you today. She did. She said you seemed short with her. I was polite. Right. But she was just being nice. Checking in. Brandon, your mother-in-law asked about my will. That's not checking in. That's fishing. Silence on the line. Dad, no one's fishing. People just want to know you're okay. If you want to know if I'm okay, you call. You visit. You don't send your mother-in-law to ask about my estate planning. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. He sighed, frustrated. Look, if you've changed things, that's your business. But it would be nice to know. Would it? Why? Because I'm your son. You are. And when you told me I wasn't part of your plans, I took that seriously. Another silence, longer this time. We're still family, Dad. Are we? I haven't seen you in 2 months. You could have called. I almost laughed. Good night, Brandon. I hung up before he could respond. The conversation confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't about relationship. It was about control. About knowing where they stood financially. The next morning, I called Victor. I need to make another revision. This time I was specific, detailed. The trust would remain, but with tighter conditions. Timelines for distribution, accountability measures, documentation requirements. The house would not transfer to Brandon directly. It would be sold, with proceeds divided according to terms I specified. The retirement accounts would be structured to prevent immediate liquidation. Monthly distributions only, managed by Victor, for a period of 5 years. If Brandon contested the will or failed to meet involvement requirements, distributions would cease. This is more than structure. Now, Thomas. This is consequence. It's protection. I corrected. For both of us. He gets support if he shows up. If he doesn't, the money goes where it can do good. Victor nodded. You want to add an explanation? Yes. In writing. I spent an hour writing it. Not angry, not bitter, just factual. This is what you said. This is what I heard. This is my response. When do they find out? Victor asked. When they need to, I said. 3 months later, my phone rang at 11 at night. Brandon's name lit up the screen. Dad, I need your help. His voice was tight, stressed. The careful distance was gone. What's wrong? A deal fell through. A big client backed out. I need to make payroll next week, and I'm short. Really short. How short? 18,000. I closed my eyes. The same amount I'd given him for the business loan 2 years ago. Brandon, I know I still owe you from before. I know, but this is different. This is my business. My employees. If I can't make payroll, I lose everything. What does Nicole say? She doesn't know how bad it is. Her mother would panic. Dad, please. I need this. The fear in his voice was real. The desperation genuine. For a moment, I almost said yes. Almost transferred the money like I always had. Then I remembered sitting on his couch, hearing those words, watching him look relieved. Brandon, I thought I wasn't part of your plans anymore. The line went quiet, completely quiet. Dad, you said it. I listen. Now you need to manage. That's what Patricia called it, right? Managing. This is different. It's not. So you're just going to let my business fail? I'm going to let you handle your own plans. I hung up. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The text started the next day. This is cruel. You're punishing me. I can't believe you do this. Then Nicole joined in. Do you know what you're doing to your son? We needed you, and you turned her back. You're selfish. Patricia sent a long message about family loyalty, about forgiveness, about how I was being controlling and bitter. I didn't respond to any of them. Not one. A week later, Brandon called again. I had to borrow from Nicole's parents at 15% interest. I'm sorry you're struggling, I said calmly. Are you? Because it doesn't feel like it. Brandon, when you needed space, I gave it. When you said I wasn't part of your plans, I believed you. Now you want me to be part of them again, but only when it's convenient. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. He hung up on me. The text stopped after that. So did the calls. The silence was different now. Before, it was them creating distance. Now it was me maintaining boundaries. Their boundaries worked both ways. A month later, the messages changed tone. You've changed. You're not the dad I knew. Money matters more to you than family. I always knew you kept score. Nicole sent a long email about how I was bitter about aging, how I was taking my loneliness out on them, how I needed to apologize for my behavior. Patricia left a voicemail that started sympathetic and ended accusatory. We've all tried to understand your position, Thomas, but this has gone too far. Your son needs support, and you're withholding it to prove some point. This isn't about boundaries anymore. It's about cruelty. Harold listened to me read some of the messages over coffee. They want access, he said simply, not relationship. Access. That's what Victor said. Your attorney is smart. Harold stirred his coffee slowly. My daughter sent me birthday cards for 5 years after she moved. Never called, never visited. But every birthday, a card. Then I changed my will. The card stopped. What did you do with the inheritance? Gave it to my neighbor's kid, the one who mows my lawn and checks on me. Family is who shows up, Thomas, not who shares your blood. I thought about that for a long time. Brandon called 2 months later. I talked to a financial advisor. He said you might be willing to help if we structure it properly. What does that mean? A loan, official terms, repayment schedule, interest if you want, all legal. How much? $30,000 to stabilize the business and pay back Nicole's parents. I considered it. What are the terms? 5-year repayment, 4% interest, monthly payments, completely official. And if you default? He hesitated. Then we work it out. No. If you default, I want collateral. Something that makes this real. Dad, that's business, Brandon. You want me to treat this like a financial transaction? Fine. But it needs to be a real one, with real consequences. What kind of collateral? 10% stake in your consulting firm. If you default, I become a partner. Long silence. I need to talk to Nicole. Take your time. He called back 3 days later. We can't agree to that. Nicole says it's too controlling. Then I guess we don't have a deal. So you won't help? I offered help, with conditions. You refused. Those aren't conditions, Dad. That's leverage. Yes, I agreed. It is. He didn't call back. 2 weeks later, Patricia left a voicemail. Her voice shook with anger. You are a bitter, controlling man. Your son needed help, and you made it about power. You're going to die alone, Thomas. Alone and miserable. And when you do, don't expect anyone to mourn you. You had a chance to be a father, and you chose to be a banker. That's disposable. You're disposable. I saved the voicemail, backed it up, sent a copy to Victor. Is this evidence of something? I asked. Potentially, Victor said. It shows their mindset, their expectations. If they contest the will, this helps establish a pattern. They're going to contest it? Almost certainly. People who feel entitled usually do. I thought about Patricia's voice, the rage underneath the words. She wasn't angry about Brandon's business. She was angry that I was disrupting their plans. Plans that depended on my money. Plans that required my silence. Plans that only worked if I cooperated. I wasn't cooperating anymore. 4 months later, I had a health scare. Chest pains that turned out to be stress-related, nothing serious. But the hospital kept me overnight for observation. I didn't call Brandon. Didn't tell anyone except Harold, who drove me home the next morning. But somehow word got out, maybe through my insurance, maybe through hospital staff who knew the family. Within hours, my phone started ringing. Brandon, Nicole, even Patricia, they all suddenly cared. Brandon showed up at my house that evening with flowers. Dad, why didn't you call me? It wasn't serious. Still, I should have been there. He looked genuinely concerned. Are you okay now? I'm fine. Nicole appeared behind him. Thomas, you scared us. Have you updated your medical directives? Do you have a living will? There it was. The real concern. Everything is handled, I said. We should probably review it together, Nicole suggested, just to make sure it's current. It's current. Brandon touched my arm. Dad, we've had our differences, but you're still my father. If something happens, I need to know your wishes. My wishes are documented. Victor has everything. Your attorney? Brandon frowned. Shouldn't family have access to those documents? Why? Because we're family. You said, I wasn't part of your plans, Brandon. Remember? His face hardened. That was about boundaries. This is about practical matters. It's all the same to me, I said quietly. Now I'm tired. Thank you for stopping by. They left reluctantly, exchanging worried glances. That night, Nicole texted me. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. I didn't respond. The next day, I met with Victor. They came to check on me, then immediately asked about documents. Victor nodded, unsurprised. The health scare made it real for them. Mortality has a way of clarifying priorities. Their priorities haven't changed, just their urgency. What do you want to do? I want to reassure them, let them relax. Why? Because I'm not cruel. I'm just done being managed. Victor drafted a letter. Warm, general. It confirmed I had updated everything recently, that my affairs were in order, that they shouldn't worry. It didn't specify what those updates were. Brandon called after receiving it. Thanks for this, Dad. It helps. I'm glad. So everything is the way it was? I smiled at his careful wording. Everything is exactly the way it should be. He seemed satisfied with that. The calls became less frequent again. The concern faded. They thought they knew what the way it should be meant. They were wrong. 6 months later, I requested one final meeting with Victor. I want to make one last change. Are you sure? Completely. We worked through the modifications. This version was final, complete, ironclad. The trust remained, with all conditions intact. The timeline stood. The requirements for involvement stayed. But I added one more element. At the beginning of the document, before the legal language and distribution clauses, I added a statement. A quote, actually. Brandon's exact words from that Sunday in his living room. You're not part of our plans anymore. Below it, I added my response. When my son told me this, I took him at his word. This document reflects that truth. I have not punished anyone. I have simply listened. Victor read it carefully. This makes your reasoning clear. That's the point. They'll be angry. They already are. At least this way, they'll understand why. I signed the final version. Victor witnessed. We sealed it formally, filed it properly, made it legal and unbreakable. When do they find out? Victor asked. When they need to. I left his office feeling lighter. The weight I'd been carrying, the uncertainty, the anger, the hurt, had transformed into something else. Clarity. 2 years passed quietly. I lived my life, worked at the community center, traveled a little, saw Harold regularly. My sister Helen visited twice. Brandon and I maintained minimal contact. Birthday calls, holiday texts, polite and distant. He never asked about money again. I never offered. Then at 64, I had a stroke. Minor, but serious enough. I recovered well, but the message was clear. Time was not infinite. Brandon came to the hospital, sat with me, even cried a little. I don't want to lose you, Dad, he said. I patted his hand. I know. When I was discharged, he helped me get home. Nicole brought food. They stayed a few days. It felt almost like before, almost like family. But I noticed they asked about the will again. Gently, carefully. Everything is settled. I told them, don't worry. 3 months later, I died peacefully in my sleep. Heart failure. The doctor said I didn't suffer. Harold found me when I missed our Saturday coffee. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Brandon arrived with Nicole and Patricia. They all wore black. Their faces were appropriately somber, but I could see the anticipation underneath, the certainty. Victor sat at the head of the conference table. He opened the folder carefully. Before we begin the distribution, there's a statement from Thomas that he wanted read aloud. Brandon shifted in his seat. A statement. Victor adjusted his glasses and read, You're not part of our plans anymore. These words were spoken to me by my son Brandon on March 14th, 2 years before my death. In the interest of honesty and clarity, I want to address them directly. The room went completely still. Brandon's face drained of color. Victor continued reading my words. The whole explanation. What I heard, what I understood, what I decided. When you told me I wasn't part of your plans, I respected that. I took you at your word. This document reflects that truth. Nicole grabbed Brandon's hand. Patricia's mouth formed a thin line. I didn't punish you. I listened. Victor set down the first page. Now we'll proceed to the distributions. Victor explained the structure methodically. Brandon would receive a trust, not an inheritance. A trust, managed by Victor, distributed monthly over 5 years, conditional on documented involvement in community service, specifically mentoring young men without fathers. If he completed the requirements, he'd receive approximately 40% of the estate's value. Structured, controlled, earned. Nicole received nothing directly. Not as punishment, Victor explained, but because she wasn't family by Thomas's definition, the definition established by their own statement. Patricia received $1. Symbolic, legal, a way of saying, I remembered you. Brandon's face went from pale to red. This is insane. He can't do this. It's completely legal, Victor said calmly. We'll contest it. You can try. But Thomas was mentally sound. The document is recent. The reasoning is clear. And I have recordings of him explaining his choices. Recordings? Nicole's voice was sharp. Thomas was very thorough. He anticipated challenges. Brandon stood up. This is revenge. Pure revenge. No, Victor said. This is consequence. There's a difference. Patricia spoke for the first time. Where does the rest go? Victor smiled slightly. Let me show you. The remaining 60% of my estate, the house sale, the larger portion of retirement accounts, the investments, went to 3 organizations. First, a scholarship fund for trade schools, for young people who couldn't afford college but wanted practical skills, 20%. Second, a community program supporting aging men, without family, helping them maintain independence, dignity, and connection, 20%. Third, a fund managed by Harold, to be distributed at his discretion to people who showed up. His words, my trust, 20%. Thomas wanted his legacy to matter beyond personal relationships, Victor explained. He wanted it to help people who needed it. And Brandon doesn't need it? Nicole snapped. Brandon has his business, his health, his family. These organizations serve people with fewer resources. This is unbelievable, Patricia said. This is final, Victor corrected. Brandon just sat there, staring at nothing. The certainty he'd walked in with had evaporated completely. Is there anything else? He finally asked. Yes, Victor said. One more thing. Victor handed Brandon an envelope. Thomas asked me to give you this personally. Brandon opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter. I watched from wherever I was now as he read it. The letter wasn't angry. It was honest. I explained that I loved him, that I always would. But that love didn't mean accepting dismissal. I told him the trust was designed not to punish, but to teach. That showing up mattered. That relationships required effort. That family was a verb, not a noun. I wrote that if he completed the requirements, the community service, the mentoring, the showing up for others who needed it, he'd receive not just money, but something more valuable. Purpose. I didn't cut you off. I wrote at the end. I gave you a choice. You can contest this and walk away with nothing but anger, or you can lean in and discover what I learned too late. That meaning comes from service. That legacy is built through connection. That plans that don't include people who love you are just blueprints for loneliness. The choice is yours, son. It always was. Brandon set down the letter. His hands were trembling. Nicole started to speak, but he held up his hand. Don't, he said quietly. Just don't. He looked at Victor. What do I do first? For the community service? Victor explained the program. Brandon nodded slowly. Can I start next week? Whenever you're ready. Brandon stood, folded the letter carefully, and put it in his pocket. He walked out without looking at Nicole or Patricia. 3 months later, Harold called Victor. You should know, Brandon completed his first mentoring session. The kid he's working with is 15. No dad. Struggling in school. Brandon showed up on time. Stayed late. The kid's teacher said it's the first time he's seen the boy smile in months. Victor asked if he should tell me. Harold laughed. I think Thomas already knows. And somehow, I think he was right.